Hi, Lewis Kemper here. I'm going to show you how I use Starry Landscape Stacker to process the images I took at Black Butte Lake. Here I'm in Lightroom, and if you look at the screen, you'll see I have a lot of images of the night sky. So I did two sets of 31 images apiece. Whoops. So I'm just going to process the second set. It was a little bit darker. Maybe there was a better chance of having the Milky Way. So I want you to see that if I click on this image, if you look up here, it's shot at ISO 12,800. Yes, you heard me right, 12,800 at 15 millimeter, f3.2, and a 6-second exposure. If you were to look at this image large, you would expect it to have a lot of noise. And you would be right. If I blow this up to 100%, you can see two things. One, you can definitely tell it was my first night doing the Milky Way because I'm not focused quite as good as I should be for the images. They're not quite super duper sharp. But if you look, you'll notice there's lots and lots of noise in this image, and that's from being photographed at 12,800 ISO. But I shot 30 images at 6 seconds apiece, which is about 180 seconds worth of images or 3 minutes worth of light gathering. And we're going to use Starry Landscape Stacker to blend these images together, which will eliminate the noise and concentrate that light as if I were taking a 3-minute exposure and hopefully giving me more color and things in the stars. So you can see here in the 6-second exposure, all the stars pretty much just look white. You can see all that light pollution that I was talking about on the horizon. So I'm going to click on the first image. I'm going to scroll down to that bottom image. I'm going to hold my shift key and click there. Now, these are raw files. And for most people, if you process your raw files, you can actually process them directly in the Starry Landscape Stacker by dragging your raw files right onto the icon here in the dock for Starry Landscape Stacker, and it would open those. But since I'm shooting with a Z9, a Nikon Z9, and I'm shooting in one of the compressed modes, the Apple operating system can't open that raw file. What I really need to do, and I haven't tested it yet, I'm going to have to do that now that I have the Z9, is just go out and shoot a couple raw pictures and see if the Apple operating system will be able to open an uncompressed raw file. I think it will, and then I'll be able to use those in Starry Landscape Stacker from here on out. So for me, I need to convert these images to TIFF files first before I can use them in Starry Landscape Stacker. So I'm going to just go over here to Export. And I'm going to choose a folder where I want them to go to. And I've created a folder on my hard drive called Black Butte Lake. That's where I want them to go. So I'm going to choose that folder. And then what I'm doing is I'm saving these as a TIFF. I'm putting them in ProPhoto RGB, and I'm not resizing them at all, so they'll be full-size TIFF images. And that's all I have to do, and hit export. And it's going to export those 31 images. Before I do that, I just want to show you, I'm going to go over here to Bridge. This is the way I had my camera set up using the interval timer shooting, and it's set to take 30 exposures times 1. So I'm actually going to get 31 exposures, and my exposures, as you saw, were 6 seconds each, but the interval between exposures is 8 seconds. So it's going to take a 6-second exposure. Basically, it pauses for 2 seconds, that's the 8 seconds, and shoots another exposure. So not counting the first one, it does 30 more frames, so I end up with 31. And that's all I need to do in the camera. Now when I go into Lightroom, I select those 30 images. I'm going to do that export we just talked about. And I'm going to choose that folder again. And there it's got my Black Butte image folder selected. So normally at this part, you would hit export. I've already done this, so I don't have to wait for all of these to export for you guys to see the video. So I'm going to hit cancel because I've already created those images. So I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to go over here and open up Starry Landscape Stacker. And right away, Starry Landscape Stacker asks me where I want to go and open up my images. So I'm on my Black Butte Lake folder. I click on the first image in that folder, scroll down to the bottom, hold the shift key, click on the last one, and I say open. Now this will take a little bit of time as well for Starry Landscape Stacker to read the 31 images and align them. So I'm going to pause the video, and when that portion is done, I'll come back on and show you the next steps. So that really only took about a minute, minute and a half, but I didn't want you to sit there and have to wait and watch a progress bar. So a Starry Landscape Stacker brings up your image and puts these red dots, which shows you the sky separated from the foreground. And as you can see here, because I had all the light pollution, it didn't do such a good job separating the foreground down low. So I'm going to take my cursor and I'm just going to add some red dots. And I always like to do this and go really as close as I can. And I can just click down with the cursor very close to the horizon line and put some red dots in there. And you can just click and drag if you would like to put your dots in. I like to go close to the land, and then I'm more careful. I just click and put as close to the land as I can get a couple of dots. And I'm going to do that all along the shoreline here. And this is telling Starry Landscape Stacker what is sky and what is land. And that looks pretty good to the edge. And now I can just take my cursor and wiggle it around and put in a lot of dots in the areas that don't have a lot of dots, so that it knows what's sky and what is land. So I'm going to go up and add a few million more dots here. And I like to go around the edges so it gets all the edge as well, and up in the corners. And any of these blank spots I like to try to put some dots into. So you don't have to be super duper careful, because you'll see I'll probably miss some spots and then you get to paint it in later. But I like to give Starry Landscape Stacker as much info as it can as what separates sky from land. And then once you do all the dots, and if I made a mistake and put a dot down into the land, I can go over here and hit erase dots and then subtract that. You can change the size of the eraser if you want. And once you've got all your red dots in, you just say, find sky. And you can see it's finding the sky, and it missed a couple little places down here, and I get a brush right here, and my brush is set to sky. So wherever I paint with the brush is going to paint in blue, and it's going to tell it that that's sky. And I think this is actually sky down here, not any trees sticking up. So I'm going to come down. But that's close enough. Now I'm going to say align and composite. And it's aligning my 30 images to the first one, so that's why it's 31. And this goes pretty quickly. You can see, you know, I'm almost halfway done already. And we'll do this one in real time so you get an idea of how the program is working. And now it's all aligned. And if I look at this image, what I'm going to do is hit the zoom to actual pixels. And you can see there's my blurriness. But if I scroll through the image, you can see all that noise is gone from the picture. We'll zoom to fit. And then I'm just going to tell it to save the current image. And if you look very faintly right in here, I can see a little trace of the core of the Milky Way. And I think some of this cloud feature that we see here is actually Milky Way. So I'm going to say save current image. Ask me where, it takes me back to that folder. It puts in, changes the name using this minimum horizon noise for the algorithm that it's using into the title so you can find your picture. I'm going to hit save. And now I'm going to open up Photoshop, or in this case, well, we're in Lightroom. I'll go back to Lightroom. And what I want to do now is I want to import that image, and it's from another folder. So I have to hit import here. And I have to negotiate on my hard drive to that folder. So it's under Starry Landscape Stacker Sets and Black Butte Lake. And I only want to get this first one that ends with the minimum horizon noise in the word. So I'm going to uncheck them all. I'm going to check that one. I'm going to tell it to import that image. So you can see that file's imported, and if I go to all photographs, it shows up right here at the top of that stack group. And now I'm going to go into the develop module and see if I can bring out that Milky Way a little bit. So the Milky Way is here. And what I like to do to all of my night images is I start off with a little bit of dehaze and clarity. So I want to apply that to the sky. So I'm going to go and see what happens if I find sky with the mask. It did a pretty good job, but it cuts into the ground a little bit here. So I'm going to subtract with a brush, and I'm going to use my tablet and my pen here to draw with my brush. And I want to subtract. I'm going to make this brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to come in here and subtract the red mask, mostly from the water. And now I'm just affecting this area. Now the thing is, this is where the Milky Way was the strongest, and you can see that it tapers off a little bit. It's not as red up there as it is down here. So now I'm going to hit add and use a brush and just see. I can't make that any redder. No, maybe not. Maybe it's just the light pollution behind. I don't think that's getting... Oh, it is getting a little redder. But this is the area where the Milky Way was the strongest. So now I'm going to go over here. And the first thing I'm going to do is dehaze the sky. And you can see, I'm getting to see a little bit more of the core of the Milky Way in here. I'm going to give it a little clarity. That'll help bring it out a little bit more. But as I mentioned, you know, the reason I didn't photograph too much was because there was so much light pollution that you're not going to get a very well-defined Milky Way here. So this is probably about the best that I'm going to get for this image, pulling this off. Again, if I blow it up to 100%, take the hand tool, you can see though that all that horrible noise is gone from the images. Wish my focus was better, but it wasn't that great anyway of a scene, so I didn't really spend a whole lot of time once I got out there, because I knew that it wasn't going to be that good. I wasn't going to be able to see the Milky Way. But I want to show you some other examples where I've used this technique. But that's how easy it is to do stacking and using Starry Landscape Stacker. If you're work on Windows and not on Mac, you won't be able to use Starry Landscape Stacker. You're going to have to use a program called Sequator. And that's like the word equator with an S in front of it. So S-E-Q-U-A-T-O-R. Yeah, I think I spelled that right. Sequator. So I'm going to head back over to the bridge. And I'm just going to show you some images that I've done with stacking when it was really dark out and you could see the Milky Way. So these are all stacked images using Starry Landscape Stacker to create these Milky Way photographs. So stacking is one of the best ways to get a lot of color and definition in your Milky Way. And as you can see, there's color in here as opposed to just white stars. If you were to look at this, you'd see blue stars, yellow stars, red stars. And that's what you get from doing the stacking technique. Well, since that wasn't such a great demo, I'm going to do a real quickie using some raw files and showing you some well-focused pictures and how well stacking works real quickly on a better example. I don't want to leave you with a bad taste for Starry Landscape Stacker and the stacking technique. So I'm going to go into Lightroom, and I've got, let's see, if I click on the last one and click on the first one here, I've got 24 images selected. Again, if you look at them, they're f3.2 at 6 seconds a piece. These were done at ISO 10,000. These are raw files done with my Nikon D850, so they weren't compressed raw files, and they will open up on my Apple OS. So I'm just going to take them and drag them right into Starry Landscape Stacker down here in my dock, and it's going to read the 24 images. Since they're raw files, it brings up this, allowing me to make some changes to those raw files. What I like to do is I like to go back in the Lightroom and I like to set the temperature and tint to the way I shot them in Lightroom. So I'm going to hop back in and I'm going to just click on one of these images and go to the Develop module and just check my temperature and tint here. And I'm a 44 and plus 9. So I'm going to hop into Starry Landscape and I'm just going to change this to 44 and 9 so they're what the original is, and say done. And it's going to read these 24 images. Again, I will pause this part so you don't have to watch the progress bar. And I'll come back to you once all the images are loaded. Once this comes up, it's just telling me that I changed the white balance for those images, which is okay, because I did that on purpose. And now it brings up my image. And again, I'm going to add a few dots in these areas of gaps. So I'm going to go over to the corner. And then I'm going to come down here real close to the rock formations. And this area of sky in the little arch here, I need to tell it that that's sky and not rock. And just come in a little bit closer. And I'm just clicking with the cursor. And putting them in there, and then just doing a few squiggles in the areas that look like gaps to me. And now I'm going to tell it to find the sky. You can see it put a little blue here on the rock. So I have to go to the paint with ground and tell that that's ground and not sky. And the rest looks really good. So I just have to hit Align and Composite. And I'm going to let this happen in real time here. Won't take too long. And there's my picture. Now if I do again that zoom actual pixels, you can see a little bit of color now in the stars here. I'm going to go back to zoom to fit. And I'm just going to tell it to save the current image. I'm going to save it into that same Black Butte folder. Only this time I'm going to put, I may already have one in Lightroom with this name in it, so I'm going to put -2 here and a space just in case. I'm going to save that to that folder. I'm going to go back to Lightroom. I'm going to the library module here. I'm going to import. I'm going to my Black Butte folder. Here's the image right there, but I've got check marks on these other ones, so I have to uncheck them all. And I am going to check the one that has the 2 in it. There was one in Lightroom with that name, so it's a good thing I did that. And now I'm going to import that image. And I'm going to go to all photos just so I can show you what an original look like. So here's the one, the very first one in the stack. So here's one of the originals. And I just want to blow this up to 100% and wait for it to load. And you can see it's sharp, and you can see all the noise, and you can see that the stars look white. All right, you don't see a lot of color here in the Milky Way. Now if I go over to the one we just processed, you can see that I have some blue stars. I've got some yellow stars. If I scroll through, there's probably some red ones somewhere. But you can see there's more color to this image. And again, if we take this into the Develop module, we go to the masking icon and select Sky. Then I want to bring this down to fit. You can see it selected the sky. It picked up a little bit of ground here, but I'm not going to worry about that. It did miss this portion of the sky in the middle. So I'm going to come down here because I want this sky to change as well. I'm going to say Add with a brush. And I'm going to take my brush. And I'm not being super duper careful for this demo, but we've added that part of the sky. I could come in and subtract from the land here, but I don't think it's going to matter all that much. Go back to fit. I'm going to go down to dehaze and dehaze that sky a fair amount. I'm going to add clarity to that sky. Now if you look, if we go back to 100%, you can see a lot more definition here. What I also like to do is go and add saturation to the whole sky, and that brings out even more color. Now you can see all the different color stars being brought out more. You can see some of the pinkish glow of the nebula down in here in the Milky Way. Another thing that I kind of like to do sometimes is make the sky just a little bit bluer instead of that black color. And I do that by going to color grading, and I go to the shadows, and I just pull the shadows a little to the blue. So I like my sky to have a little bit more of a bluish tint to it. And then if you want to work on accentuating the reds and different things in those colors, you can go to the HSL and you can saturate the reds and the oranges and the yellows and bring up even more color in the Milky Way. And now if you take a quick look at this, well, go into all the stuff I would do. I would take a brush now and I would take the highlights and the clarity a little bit, and again I'm going to use the tablet to brush in here, and I would just take that on the Milky Way, and let me just see what my brush attributes are. Flow. Let me turn the flow down just a little bit, and I'm just going to paint into there. And then if we blow this up 100%, you can see all the color and all the detail that was brought out. And again, remember that the original image looked like this. This is what one single exposure looked like at ISO 10,000 at 6 seconds and 3.2. And these are the results we get from the stacking. So I hope that makes you feel a little bit better about Starry Landscape Stacker. And again, if you're on a Windows machine, you would want to use Sequator for the program to do this. And they both work rather similarly. The good thing is if you're on a PC, Sequator is free. If you're on a Mac, it's about $30 or $40 to buy Starry Landscape Stacker. So hopefully this will encourage you to try stacking your images when photographing the Milky Way.